For more on the politics of the president's immigration announcement and the rest of the political news of the day, I'm joined by Ken Vogel, Politico's chief investigative reporter, and Craig Crawford, politics blogger, CraigCrawford.com, and author of The Politics of Life. Ken, let me begin with you. Does this move by the president today upstage Mitt Romney and or put him in a bind, or both?
Well, it definitely puts them in a bind, and Republicans as a whole. I agree with the representative to some extent. These are kids that we're talking about here. You don't want to be seen, it's just bad politics to be seen as pushing any kind of policy that clamps down or deprives kids who, again, through no fault of their own, find themselves in a particular situation. Beyond that, of course, you have the politics of this vast block of swing voters for whom this is a very appealing policy pronouncement, regardless of whether it was through executive order or how long-term it is. This is something that really appeals to them. And as far as the base is, I don't think it changes the dynamics there either way. Anyone who was against immigration reform was not going to vote for President Obama regardless. Anyone who was for immigration reform and for amnesty or whatever you want to call it was going to vote for President Obama. So it doesn't affect the bases. It helps them with the swing vote. It's good politics.
You know, Craig, let me turn to you. It's interesting when you read, at least what I've seen of Mitt Romney's response thus far, it is very muted. It mirrors Marco Rubio's response, not surprisingly, where it says, gee, this is only a short-term answer. Well, in the world I live in, a short-term answer is better than no answer. So that doesn't seem like a whole lot of a criticism, certainly as opposed to some of the more rabid voices in the Republican right, harshly criticizing this as anti-American or illegal. So is Mitt Romney trying to walk a high-wire act, which inevitably he'll fall off because he's an awkward guy, but is that what he's trying to do?
Well, he's trying to have it a little bit of both ways. Senator Rubio's in a fix because he proposed this same thing, but he obviously wants to criticize anything Obama does. This short-term versus long-term thing is kind of like saying you're not going to eat a sandwich because you can't afford steak. I mean, this is just not an argument that works when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. I'm not sure I agree with Ken. I'm curious about the swing voters. Now, I'm not sure this policy is going to help with the immigration with white working class and a lot of independents where Obama's struggling. And while I think it's a fair and just policy, I just wonder about the politics, to be crassly political about it. What he's doing is risking irritating a lot of those voters where he's struggling to appeal to a voting group that he's already leads by 2-1.
Well, let me jump in here for a second, Craig. I think you framed the equation the right way. I think there's no question this policy will appeal to a swing vote, the Latino vote, and solidify that support and persuade what had been an ambiguous Latino base that, yes, President Obama is clearly doing what he can do. But you're right, on the other side of the ledger, it might alienate a sort of white base, independent vote that says, wait a minute, those are the jobs, and this is the fear, those jobs, those kids are going to somehow encroach upon our turf. Ken, how do you balance out those two sides of the equation?
It's definitely a balancing act, but I just don't see how Republicans, whether it's Romney or some of these outside groups acting on his behalf, target that argument. Each time that we've seen Republicans or opponents of immigration reform try to target that argument that expanding immigrants' rights, expand amnesty is going to hurt, take away jobs from Americans, it just comes across sounding borderline racist, playing either a race card, some kind of ethnic, playing ethnic groups or racial groups against one another. And I just don't think that that is a winner. I mean, you could try and you could be subtle and say that, these are jobs that Americans will want to do. But I think a lot of people hear that, and they hear sort of coded racial or ethnic discriminatory language that turns them off.
Look, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that one reason the administration felt it necessary to do this for Latinos is they are really getting hammered by a lot of Latino leaders because deportations in the Obama administration have hit record highs, double what they were under Bush. And this is what a lot of Latino leaders have been complaining about a lot. And the devilish details of this proposal haven't come out yet. What kind of proof will be required? Will there be a fee to pay? How high will that be? A year ago, they made a policy change similar to this, saying deportations of younger people would go down, and they did not they fell way short. So a lot of Hispanic leaders privately are saying we got to stay on this. This may not be what it appears to be.
Craig, I think you are right. The effectiveness of this will remain to be proven, because there's a real question whether people will choose to go down to a government agency and show up and say, hey, I'm illegal, give me my 2 years, not knowing what happens 2 years and a day from now. Having said that, the atmospherics of the moment, the emotional impact of the president doing this, somewhat akin to the president saying he favors same-sex marriage. Again, a push-button issue, a critical issue where he had been accused of not doing enough. He came out with a rhetorical statement and got lots of plaudits for it. Whether or not it will change the law, of course, remains to be seen. Ken, let me come back to you and change gears for a moment. You wrote a remarkable piece about the Koch brothers, who seem to be amassing their own political machine, hundreds of millions of dollars in the dark of night. The secret, is there a secret handshake when they get together with their buddies and raise nearly $400 million? What are they up to, and what's their game plan?
Well, if you listen to their critics in the conservative movement, this is setting aside the arguments being made primarily by liberals and opponents of this explosion of outside money in politics, who say that this is a distortion of our democracy. So there's that criticism of them. Set that aside. You hear a lot of conservatives who I talk to, who are establishment GOP operative types, who are worried that the Kochs are trying to claim control of an ever-expanding share of the conservative movement and of, frankly, the Republican infrastructure. The Kochs came up and were sort of libertarian activists, and they funded a lot of these think tanks and advocacy groups that took positions that were outside of even the GOP mainstream. Now they're moving into it, largely, I think, driven by their enmity towards President Obama. And there are some operatives who are their ostensible allies who are saying, hey, thanks, but no thanks. We're worried that you're trying to take some of our pie, both in the form of our donors, who the Kochs are actively recruiting through these summits like the one we wrote about, and also through their control of, or their efforts to sort of infiltrate to some extent some of these pre-existing outside groups that are really well-established Republican, sort of Republican-leaning groups like the National Rifle Association, to which they steered some of their funds, like the National Right to Life. These are not groups that we think of as Koch-associated groups, but they are now.
Yeah, as you point out,
we need to remember what they're buying. These guys are on a crusade to gut the EPA. They run energy and chemical companies that have paid over $500 million in fines over there. Even George Bush administration fined these guys for dumping carcinogens and lying about it. Over 300 million oil spills. They want politicians, and they'd love a friendly president who guts the EPA. They'd make a lot of money.
Indeed they would. And Ken, as you point out, pseudo-libertarians whose industries depend upon taxpayer-driven subsidies and a tax code made of Swiss cheese so they don't pay their fair share. Libertarians in name only. Hypocrites is what we call them. All right, Politico chief investigative reporter Ken Vogel, politics blogger Craig Crawford, many thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Eliot.
A programming reminder, I won't be here next week, but you're in luck occupying this chair, the one and only Joy Behar. That's every night. Next week, 8 p.m. Eastern, Joy Behar, 1 week only until the fall, right here on Courage TV.